The smell of my mother's roast chicken usually meant one of two things. A major holiday or a major guilt trip was on the menu. Tonight, it was definitely the latter. The air was thick with the scent of rosemary and regret. I watched my sister Clara across the mahogany dining table, her face a perfect portrait of theatrical sorrow. I just, I can't believe she would do that, she sniffled, dabbing a pristine napkin at a non existent tear. That design was my entire future, and Alara just took it. My parents' faces, a matched set of sympathy and concern, swiveled to me. My father's brow was furrowed. My mother's lips were a thin, disappointed line. They drank in every word, as always. But this time was different. This time, I was broadcasting. Tucked neatly under the collar of my sweater, a tiny digital recorder, my only souvenir from my last disastrous spin on this mortal coil, was capturing every last lie. In this life, I wasn't the victim. I was the producer. The chicken was barely digested before the ambush came. They cornered me in the hallway, the faded floral wallpaper suddenly feeling like a cage. Ilara, my father's voice had that deep, booming quality he reserved for when he was about to pronounce a life sentence. We need to talk about your behavior. It's beyond behavior, John, my mother cut in, her voice a sharp, icy whisper that could flay skin. It's theft. From your own sister. How could you? Clara hovered behind them, a ghost in the dim light. She was weeping, of course. Big, fat, crocodile tears that I'm sure she'd practiced in the mirror. But over my mother's shoulder, when she thought no one could see, she shot me a tiny, triumphant smirk. Bingo! They didn't ask for my side of the story. They never did. It was easier to believe in Clara's damsel in distress act than to confront the fact that their perfect younger daughter was a manipulative sociopath in training. We're taking your laptop, my father announced, and your phone. You can have them back when you've learned to respect this family. And you're grounded for a month, my mother added. Maybe some time alone will help you think about what you've done. I just nodded. I let my silence be their confirmation, my blank expression, the canvas onto which they could paint their disappointment. It was better this way. Let them think they had me trapped. Let them think they'd won. What they didn't know was that my real work, my real vengeance, wasn't brewing on a laptop. It was already in motion. For 3 days, I was the perfect prisoner. I stayed in my room, read books, and stared out the window with what I hoped was a convincing level of teenage angst. I heard them whispering outside my door. She seems to be taking it seriously this time, my mother would say, full of misplaced satisfaction. If only they knew. The moment the house fell into its usual nighttime silence, my real life began. The old, noisy air vent under my bed wasn't just for circulation. A gentle pull on the grate revealed a small cavity, and inside my secret weapon, a burner phone I'd bought with cash 2 months ago. The recording from dinner was flawless, crystal clear, Clara's whiny accusations, my mother's sharp condemnations, my father's disappointed sighs. It was a symphony of betrayal. I propped myself up against my pillows, the blue light of the screen casting long shadows across my room. I opened a new, anonymous email account. The recipient, the head of admissions for the Northwood Design Institute, Clara's dream school. To whom it may concern, I typed. Subject, an inquiry regarding academic integrity. Applicant Clara Vance. I attached the audio file. Then, I logged into a secure cloud server they'd never known existed, a digital vault where I kept my real work. I attached the original timestamp design files for the portfolio piece Clara had claimed as her own. My files were dated 6 months before hers. The metadata was undeniable. My finger hovered over the send button. A part of me, the old me, hesitated. This wasn't just a prank. This had consequences. Then I remembered my last life. The years of being gaslit, marginalized, and erased to make room for Clara's endless drama. I remembered the pain, the isolation. I pressed send. The neon glare of the phone screen felt like a beacon of my newfound power. Now, all I could do was wait. I chewed on my thumbnail, a nervous habit I thought I'd kicked. Would a busy, overworked admissions officer at a prestigious university even bother with an anonymous email from a throwaway account? Or would it be deleted without a second thought, my perfectly crafted revenge dissolving into the digital ether? A week passed, a long, excruciating week. I played my part, eating my meals in sullen silence and accepting my parents' lectures with a practiced air of contrition. On the eighth day, the mail arrived. I was in the living room pretending to read when my mother brought it in. She sifted through the bills and junk mail, and then she froze. It was a thick envelope. The Northwood Design Institute's logo was embossed in the corner. "Clara!" she called, her voice trembling with excitement. "It's here!" Clara came bounding down the stairs, a vision of hopeful innocence. They tore the envelope open together, their heads bent over the thick, creamy paper. I watched their faces. First, confusion. Then, disbelief. Finally, horror. Clara let out a wail that could curdle milk. It wasn't the thin, performative cry from the dinner table. This was a raw, guttural scream of genuine agony. "What is it?" my father asked, rushing in from his study. "What's wrong?" My mother looked up, her face ashen. She couldn't speak. She just held out the letter. He snatched it from her. I could read snippets of it from across the room. Serious allegations. Discrepancies in submitted materials. Evidence of academic dishonesty. Rescind our preliminary offer. It wasn't just a rejection. It was an execution. My phone, the decoy one my parents had so graciously returned to me that morning, buzzed. It was Liam, my best friend, my crush, my last bastion of hope in this godforsaken family. "Hey," I answered, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Your mom just called my mom, completely freaking out," he said, his voice tight with confusion. She was sobbing. "Something about Northwood? What the hell happened, Alara?" "Clara lied," I said simply, "and she got caught." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. He didn't ask what she lied about. He didn't ask if I was okay. His silence was its own kind of accusation. My parents stormed into my room later that night, no knocking, of course. My father was holding the rejection letter as if it were a murder weapon. "What did you do?" he demanded, his face purple. I just looked at him, my expression a blank canvas. "I did what you told me to do," I said quietly. "I stayed in my room and thought about what I'd done." They knew. They couldn't prove it, but they knew I was behind it. Their world was cracking, and they were desperate to find someone to blame. And I had a sinking feeling their punishment for a crime they couldn't prove would be far worse than anything they'd doled out before. Their punishment was swift, brutal, and aimed right at my future. I found out a few days later, not from them, but from a stray comment Clara made. She was on the phone with a friend, her voice miraculously recovered, full of a new kind of tragic importance. "It's just been so traumatic," she sighed dramatically. "My parents think a therapeutic art retreat in Tuscany is the only way I'll be able to heal and find my inspiration again." I froze in the hallway, my blood turning to ice. The Tuscany retreat. My Tuscany retreat. The one I had researched and saved for. The one my parents had promised was my high school graduation gift. That evening, they sat me down in the living room. The air was thick with the cloying sweetness of my mother's jasmine tea, a scent I used to love. Now it just smelled like poison. "Ilara," my mother began, her voice dripping with condescension, "we've decided that the money we saved for your university fund is going to be repurposed." "Clara has been through a terrible ordeal," my father added, refusing to meet my eyes. He stared intently at a spot on the carpet. "She needs this to heal. You understand, don't you?" I didn't say a word. I just stared at them. They had taken my victory, the one pure, clean thing I had achieved, and twisted it into a weapon to hurt me further. They hadn't just chosen her side again. They were forcing me to pay for it. The final blow came the next day. Liam asked to meet me at our park, the one with the rickety swings where we'd spent countless hours since we were kids. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, and the scent of freshly cut grass filled the air. It all felt so normal, so achingly familiar. "Look," he started, kicking at a loose patch of dirt, "I think you went too far." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Clara's a wreck," he said, finally looking at me, his handsome face a mask of earnest disappointment. The same look my father wore. "Whatever she did, she's your sister. You should have just let it go. You're supposed to support her, not tear her down. I felt a sharp, physical pain in my chest, as if a rib had cracked. She accused me of stealing. She tried to ruin my reputation. My parents believed her without a second thought. It's just family drama, he said, waving a dismissive hand. It would have blown over. Instead, you did. Whatever you did. And now your parents are paying for some crazy expensive retreat. You've made everything worse. He chose them. He chose the lie. He looked at my pain, my legitimate anger, and decided it was an inconvenience to him. The last person I thought I had, the one I had secretly written Mrs. Alara Thompson in my notebooks about, was gone. I stood up. I have to go. Alara, wait. I didn't wait. I walked away, leaving him sitting on the swing set, the last vestiges of my old life turning to dust behind me. I went home, locked myself in my room, and let them think I was finally broken. Let them believe they had cut me off at the knees, emotionally and financially. But my rebirth hadn't just given me foresight. It had also shaken loose a memory I'd buried, a key I'd dismissed as a childish trinket. My grandfather. Before he died, he'd been a shrewd, sharp-eyed man who saw my father's spendthrift nature for what it was. He'd always called me his little sparrow. On my 16th birthday, he'd given me a strange gift, a heavy, ornate, old-fashioned key and a small card with a riddle written on it. In my past life, I'd lost the key and forgotten the riddle, dismissing it as one of his eccentricities. This time, I remembered. I waited until the house was dark and silent. I pried up the loose floorboard under my bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. There it was, taped to the rough wood, cool and solid in my hand. I pulled out the card from my memory box. Where numbers sleep and time stands still, a lock awaits your iron will. Not your name, but your birth will show you what your flight is worth. It clicked, a safety deposit box. And the number wasn't a random sequence, it was my birthday. I slipped out of the house before dawn, the city still wrapped in a gray, sleepy mist. I took a bus downtown to the imposing stone building of the Old City Trust and Bank, a place my father despised for its ancient ways. I felt a thrill of fear and excitement. What could my grandfather have possibly left for me that he needed to hide so carefully, so completely? Was it just a box of sentimental junk? Or was it the key to my escape? The inside of the bank was like a tomb, all marble and silence. A stern-looking woman with a tight bun led me into the vault. The air was cool and still. She slotted my key and the bank's key into the lock. With a heavy clunk, a long metal box slid out. "You can use viewing room 3, she said, her voice devoid of curiosity. I carried the box into the small private room and shut the door. My hands were trembling as I lifted the lid. It wasn't junk. It was filled with bearer bonds, stacks of them, and on top, a single folded note in my grandfather's spiky handwriting. "For your freedom, my little sparrow, fly high." I started to laugh. It was a wild, unhinged sound, bouncing off the sterile walls of the viewing room. It was more than enough. It was everything. That afternoon, I went to the public library. I didn't want to use any device that could be traced back to me. I logged onto a clunky, slow computer and created another anonymous profile on the Westbrook Community Forum, a local site my mother was obsessed with for town gossip. I uploaded a short, carefully edited audio clip. Just 30 seconds. It was Clara, her voice dripping with false sincerity, saying, I can't believe she would do that," followed immediately by my mother's voice. "It's theft from your own sister." I didn't add any commentary. I just titled the post, "Do you know what your children are saying?" By the time I got home, my phone, the burner, not the decoy, was buzzing with notifications. The post was being shared, and shared, and shared. My father came home that evening looking like he'd aged 10 years. He stormed into the living room, his face a mask of purple rage, shaking his tablet in his hand. The forum page was displayed, the comment section a mile long. "What is this?" he roared, his voice shaking. "Is this you? You are airing our dirty laundry in public? You are ruining this family." "I have no idea what you're talking about," I said, looking up from my book with wide, innocent eyes. Their perfect, manicured social standing was crumbling. The whispers at the country club were turning into shouts. And I knew they were panicking. But what desperate, insane measure would they take to try and glue the pieces of their reputation back together? Their grand plan to salvage their reputation was, in true form, both audacious and completely delusional. They decided to throw a party, a big one, a family unity gathering, they called it. The goal was to present a united front to show the gossiping neighbors and estranged friends that we were all one big, happy, misunderstood family. The price of admission for me? A public apology. To Clara, in front of everyone. It will put these vicious rumors to rest once and for all, my mother explained, her voice tight with a forced sweetness. The house reeked of lilies, dozens of them, their funereal scent making me want to gag. It felt less like a party and more like a wake. My wake. Liam was, of course, their star recruit. He was tasked with being my handler to talk sense into me before the big event. He cornered me by the wilting potted ferns near the kitchen, a sad, drooping audience for our final act. "Just do it, Ilara," he said, his voice low and earnest. He looked exhausted, caught in a trap of his own making. "For peace. It's just words. Say them, and this can all be over." He reached for my hand, a gesture that once would have sent my heart into overdrive. Now his touch felt like a brand. It was the ultimate betrayal. He wasn't just asking me to lie. He was asking me to set myself on fire to keep them all warm, to publicly validate their narrative, to erase my own truth for the sake of their comfort. I saw it with blinding clarity. They weren't just choosing her side anymore. They were trying to annihilate mine. I looked at his pleading face, at the desperate hope in his eyes. He actually thought this was a reasonable request. I pulled my hand away. "Okay," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'll do it." A wave of relief washed over his face. "Really? Oh, thank God, Ilara. You're doing the right thing." Am I? I gave him a small, cryptic smile. I was surrounded by enemies disguised as family, all of them waiting for me to break. Little did they know, I wasn't going to play their game. I was about to flip the whole damn board. An hour later, the house was full. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and a handful of my parents' closest friends milled around, clutching wine glasses and making awkward small talk. The air was thick with tension. My parents guided me to the front of the living room, where a small speaker and microphone had been set up next to the fireplace. My mother gave my shoulder a squeeze that was meant to be encouraging, but felt more like a threat. Clara stood nearby, radiating smug victory. Liam offered me a weak, encouraging smile from the crowd. I took the microphone. My hand trembled, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the sheer, unadulterated thrill of what was about to happen. "Hi, everyone," I began, my voice cracking just enough to sound fragile. My parents wanted me to say a few things. I looked up, my eyes scanning the room before finding their target. A small, discreetly placed camera nestled between two books on the bookshelf. A little insurance policy I'd paid a tech-savvy friend to install that afternoon. I smiled. Showtime. "I do have something I need to say," I said, my voice suddenly clear and strong. I took a deep breath, and I'd rather you hear it from the source. I pulled my phone from my pocket, tapped the screen, and held it up to the microphone. The room was instantly filled with the sound of our family dinner. Clara's whiny, fabricated tale of my supposed theft, my father's booming condemnation, my mother's icy pronouncements. A shocked silence fell over the guests. Faces turned from me to my parents, who were frozen in horror. But I wasn't finished. The next audio clip began to play. It was my mother's voice, dripping with saccharine poison, telling me my university fund was being repurposed for Clara's Tuscan healing journey. A collective gasp rippled through the room. My Aunt Carol, my father's sister, shot my mother a look of pure venom, and then the grand finale. Liam's voice, earnest and pleading, filled the silence. "Just do it, Ilara, for peace. It's just words." The silence that followed was shattered, utterly and completely. The implosion was instantaneous and glorious. My great-uncle started shouting at my father, demanding to know what was going on. My grandmother, a staunch matriarch who valued integrity above all else, was weeping softly in a corner. My Aunt Carol, a woman not known for her subtlety, marched straight up to Liam, her face a thundercloud. "You spineless, pathetic boy! She seethed, and then she slapped him hard across the face. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. My father, his face the color of eggplant, lunged for the microphone, but my two older cousins stepped in front of him, forming a human wall. Clara, her face a mess of real tears this time, fled the room, her sobs echoing up the stairs. Amidst the pandemonium, I stood perfectly still, the calm eye of the hurricane I had summoned. I had laid the truth bare, and it was more destructive than any lie they had ever told. My phone, the one still clutched in my hand, vibrated. I looked down, a text from a number I didn't recognize. It contained no greeting, no explanation. Just 4 words. Who in the world was texting me at this exact moment, and what could they possibly have to say? The text message glowed on my screen, a cryptic beacon in the chaos of the imploding party. Well played. He'd be proud. Below it, an address on the other side of town and a time, midnight. I knew the address. It was the stately, old-world building that housed the law firm of my late grandfather's attorney, Alistair Finch. A man I hadn't seen since the funeral, a formidable figure who moved in circles far above my family's petty dramas. I didn't hesitate. I slipped out the back door while my family was busy tearing itself apart. The cool night air was a relief, washing over my skin and clearing my head. The city's neon glare felt different tonight, less like a distraction and more like a promise. I took the bus across town, the rhythmic rumble a soothing counterpoint to the frantic beating of my heart. The law firm was dark, save for a single light on an upper floor. As I walked up the stone steps, the massive carved oak doors swung inward before I could touch them, opening into a silent, shadowy lobby. It was both impressive and deeply creepy. Alistair was waiting for me. He stood at the top of a grand staircase, a tall, silver-haired man in a perfectly tailored suit. He wasn't smiling, but there was a flicker of something, amusement, respect, in his sharp eyes. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice a low, smooth rumble. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Please, follow me." He led me to a sprawling corner office that smelled of old leather, cedar, and expensive whiskey. It was the scent of old money and quiet power. He gestured to a plush leather armchair opposite his massive mahogany desk. "Your grandfather," he began, settling into his own chair, "was a brilliant man. He was also a deeply disappointed father." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "He saw your father's lack of character, his obsession with social standing over substance. He worried about you. He suspected that your parents' nature would eventually lead to a situation very much like the one you have found yourself in." My heart hammered against my ribs. The safety deposit box was a test, Alistair confirmed, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "A preliminary assessment. Your grandfather believed that true strength wasn't inherited. It was forged in adversity. He wanted to see if you had the resourcefulness to survive." He leaned forward, his expression serious now. "He secretly amended his will before he passed. He created a new trust, a new directive. His entire estate, and I must stress, Alara, it is a vast estate, was left to you." The air left my lungs. What? A staggering portfolio of tech investments he made in the 90s, international real estate, and, most significantly, a controlling interest in a global logistics empire. The trust fund he left you is pocket money by comparison. I couldn't speak. My mind was reeling, trying to process the scale of what he was saying. I wasn't just financially independent. I was powerful. "There was, however, a condition," Alistair continued. "You could only take full control upon your 21st birthday. Or," he steepled his fingers, "sooner. If you could unequivocally prove to me, as the executor, that you possess the shrewdness, maturity, and strength of character to manage it." He gave me a long, appraising look. "Your recent strategic maneuvers," he said, the corner of his mouth twitching, "while perhaps unorthodox, have been more than convincing. You have not only survived, you have triumphed. Congratulations, Miss Vance. As of this moment, you are one of the wealthiest young women in the country." The floor didn't just shift beneath me. The entire world tilted on its axis. My family's betrayals, their petty power plays over university funds and apologies. It all seemed so small, so pathetic from this new vantage point. The power balance hadn't just flipped, it had been annihilated. A single, burning question rose through the fog of my shock. Now that I had nearly limitless resources and the backing of a man like Alistair, what was my very first move? I looked at Alistair, the plan forming in my mind with cold, crystalline clarity. "I'm going to need a team," I said. The next morning, while my parents were huddled in the kitchen, nursing hangovers and whispering in panicked tones, a sleek black town car pulled into our driveway. A woman in a razor-sharp dark gray suit stepped out. She walked to the front door and rang the bell with crisp efficiency. My mother answered, her face puffy and stained with tears. "Mrs. Vance," the woman said, her voice polite but devoid of warmth. "My name is Helena Shaw. I am the new chief of staff for Miss Elara Vance." My mother's jaw dropped. I stepped into the doorway behind Helena. Helena didn't miss a beat. She consulted a tablet she was holding. "I'm here to inform you of several recent transactions. First, an anonymous LLC, which my employer now controls, purchased the outstanding mortgage on this property this morning. As the new owners, we will be raising the rent to market value, effective in 30 days. My father stumbled into the hallway, his face ashen. "What is this nonsense?" Helena's eyes flicked to him. "Mr. Vance, good. This concerns you as well. My employer has also acquired a majority share in your company, Vance and Associates. An emergency board meeting has been called for 10 a.m. to discuss your immediate removal on the grounds of gross mismanagement." My mother made a choking sound. Her eyes darted to me, filled with a dawning, horrified understanding. She started to stammer, a broken apology forming on her lips. "Elara, I... we... I'm so sorry." I held up a single hand, silencing her. "Save it," I said, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond. "We can discuss it later." I turned, leaving Helena to hand them the paperwork. I walked past them, out the door of the house I'd grown up in, and got into the waiting car without a backward glance. I left them standing in the smoldering ruins of the life they had built on my back. The board meeting was in 2 hours. I wondered how my father would react when I walked into his boardroom, not as his disgraced daughter, but as his new boss. The Vance and Associates boardroom was exactly as I remembered it from the few times I'd been forced to attend company holiday parties as a child. Sterile, intimidating, and smelling faintly of stale coffee and desperation. The dozen board members, all men in ill-fitting suits who had patted me on the head and called me sweetheart, stared at me as if I were an alien who had just landed on their mahogany table. My father was already there, his face a mottled patchwork of rage and confusion. When I walked in, followed by Alistair and Helena, his jaw went slack. "Elara, what in God's name are you doing here? This is a private meeting." "Take your seat, John," Alistair said calmly, his voice cutting through the tension like a razor. I didn't say a word. I walked to the head of the table, my father's seat, and sat down. Helena placed a single file in front of me. I opened it and pretended to read. The coup was a masterpiece of legal efficiency. Alistair presided, calmly laying out the case. He spoke of my father's mismanagement, of company funds being diverted to personal expenses, like, for instance, a last-minute therapeutic retreat to Tuscany, of bad investments and cooked books. Helena, at a signal from Alistair, projected charts and spreadsheets onto the wall, each one a nail in my father's professional coffin. The evidence, compiled with terrifying speed by Alistair's team, was irrefutable. The vote was a formality, unanimous. My father was out. I was in, installed as the new interim chairwoman. His entire career, the identity he had lorded over our family for decades, was publicly and professionally dismantled in less than 30 minutes. Afterwards, as the board members filed out, avoiding his eyes, he stumbled towards me. "Elara," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. "Please, we can fix this." I stood up, gathered my file, and walked past him without a glance. He had built his empire on a foundation of lies. It was only fitting that it crumbled so quickly. His kingdom had fallen. I wondered who would be next to come crawling to the gates of mine. I didn't have to wait long. I found Clara a week later, not by seeking her out, but because she showed up, unannounced, at the penthouse apartment I was now renovating. The place was a chaotic construction site, buzzing with the energy of demolition and rebirth. It smelled of primer, sawdust, and new beginnings. She stood in the middle of the cavernous, empty living room, looking thin and lost, a ghost haunting a future she wasn't part of. Her designer clothes were rumpled, her arrogant swagger gone, replaced by a hollowed-out desperation. "Elara," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry." It was a pathetic apology, a rambling, incoherent mess of excuses. She was jealous, she was insecure. Our parents had always pressured her to be the best. It was a story designed to elicit pity, but I felt nothing. "I have nothing," she whispered, her eyes wide and pleading. "They cut me off after after the house. I don't have anywhere to go. Can you help me? A job, a place to stay, anything." I let her finish, listening patiently as she dug her own grave. Behind her, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittered, a universe of possibilities that she could no longer access. Just as she ran out of words, another figure appeared in the doorway. Liam. His face was etched with a shame so deep it was almost pitiful. He looked at me, then at Clara, then at the floor. He was followed by my parents. They looked older, smaller, stripped of their suburban royalty. They stood together, a miserable, united front, their faces a mask of rehearsed contrition. They had come as a group, a final, desperate delegation from the land of the banished. They all started talking at once, a symphony of regret. They apologized. They invoked the word family like a magical incantation that could undo years of cruelty. They talked about forgiveness, about second chances, about starting over. For the very first time, they were all looking at me, really seeing me. But I knew what they saw, not a daughter, not a sister. They saw a bank, a lifeline, a solution to the problems they had created for themselves. I let their pleas, their apologies, their pathetic bargaining hang in the vast, dusty air of my new home. The silence stretched, growing heavier with each passing second, becoming its own definitive statement. Finally, I spoke. My voice was calm and even, devoid of the anger and pain that had fueled me for so long. It was the voice of someone who had already won, who had already moved on. "I heard everything you said." I held their gazes one by one. Clara's desperate hope, Liam's hollow shame, my father's broken pride, my mother's terrified regret. "And my answer," I said, letting the words fall like stones into a deep, quiet well, "is no." I turned my back on their four shattered faces. I walked to the window and looked out at the sprawling, glittering city that was now mine. My refusal wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of liberation. 6 months later, the chaos had settled into a quiet, satisfying rhythm. I stood on the finished balcony of my penthouse, a glass of crisp, cold Sauvignon Blanc in my hand. The setting sun bled across the sky, painting the clouds in streaks of orange and deep violet, the colors reflecting off the vast, calm ocean. The salty breeze felt clean, washing away the last vestiges of my old life. I wasn't alone. Aunt Carol stood beside me, her own glass raised in a silent toast. In the aftermath of the implosion, she had been my rock. She had seen my strength when everyone else saw only rebellion. We had become more than aunt and niece. We were partners, allies. "To the new chairwoman," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Profits are up 12% this quarter." "To us," I countered, clinking my glass against hers. "For burning it all down and building something better." The company was thriving, not just financially, but culturally. We had implemented better pay, better benefits, and a zero-tolerance policy for the kind of nepotism and mismanagement my father had championed. There was no anger left in me, just a profound sense of peace, as expansive as the view from my balcony. A year after I had said no, I was thousands of miles away, completely and blissfully lost. I was wandering through a vibrant, chaotic souk in Marrakesh. The air, a heady, intoxicating mix of spices, cumin, turmeric, cinnamon, and the sweet scent of mint tea. The joyful cacophony of vendors hawking their wares, children laughing, and the call to prayer echoing from a distant minaret was a kind of music. Here, I wasn't a CEO, I wasn't an heiress, I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was just a traveler, anonymous and free. I had a worn leather backpack, a notebook full of sketches, and an old 35 film camera my grandfather had left me. I spent my days capturing light and shadows, smiling at strangers, and feeling utterly, completely unburdened. At the small, tiled riad where I was staying, a postcard was waiting for me. The picture was of a windswept beach in northern Scotland. The handwriting was Aunt Carol's. The message was short. The world is yours, go see it, all of it. 2 years after the refusal, I was back. Back in the city, back in the office that had once been my father's. But it was unrecognizable. The dark wood and heavy furniture had been replaced with glass, steel, and light. The walls were covered not with portraits of my ancestors, but with bold, challenging pieces by emerging artists. My chief of staff, Helena, placed a steaming cup of black coffee on my desk, the rich aroma of familiar comfort. "The Vance Foundation applications are ready for your review," she said. I smiled. The foundation was my passion project, a scholarship fund I had established to support talented, low-income students in the arts and design, kids who had the fire but not the funds. I spent the morning poring over their stories, their dreams, their incredible work. My eye caught on a particular design portfolio. It was raw, a little messy, but bursting with a ferocious, untamed genius that made my breath catch in my throat. I saw a spark of myself in the artist's statement, a familiar story of overcoming obstacles. Without a moment's hesitation, I scrawled across the top of the application. Approved. Full ride scholarship. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the massive window, not at a peaceful sunset or a distant ocean, but at the bright, bustling, energetic city in the middle of a workday. My quiet epilogue wasn't an ending. It was a foundation. The little recording device was long gone, tucked away in a box somewhere, but I hadn't forgotten its lesson. Listen. Wait. Act with purpose. My real revenge wasn't their downfall, it was my own creation. It was the quiet satisfaction of a good cup of coffee, the thrill of discovering new talent, the limitless possibility of a city that was finally truly my own.